The restaurant glowed with warm lights, but the air was sharp with perfume and false laughter. My mother-in-law stood at the head of the table, glass raised, her voice loud enough for strangers to hear. "My son," she declared, her smile stretched thin, "is proof that hard work and my guidance create the perfect family." Everyone clapped. I pressed my napkin against my lap, pretending not to hear the edge of her words. When the waitress set down my plate, something brushed my fingers. A folded piece of paper. I slipped it under my napkin, heartbeat rattling. Four rushed words stared back at me. "You need to know what your husband did here." My fork slid from my hand with a sharp clatter. I have always lived in quiet details. The sound of the kettle in the morning, the creak of the old wooden floor in the hallway, the way sunlight slants through our kitchen blinds at 7:15 a.m. Those things grounded me, even when the rest of my life felt like it belonged to someone else. Daniel, my husband, didn't notice such things anymore. His mornings began with his phone. Always the phone, buzzing, glowing, an extension of his hand. He'd walk into the kitchen half-dressed, tie dangling, voice already sharp. "Did you confirm Mom's appointment? Where's my blue shirt? Don't forget the package. Needs to be sent by noon." I'd nod, place the travel mug on the counter. Half the time he left it behind. Still, I poured the coffee, because that was our rhythm. Not out of love. At least not the kind that warms you, but out of habit, like brushing your teeth before bed. I worked at the town library. People thought it was a quiet job, but it gave me a purpose Daniel could never understand. To him, success meant applause, promotions, expensive suits. To me, it was the teenager who walked away with a stack of history books, whispering thank you as if I'd handed him gold. It was the elderly woman who returned each week just to talk for 5 minutes before checking out her novel. I liked being the kind of person people trusted with their small needs. That morning, before Daniel's birthday dinner, a boy with messy hair came in looking panicked. His project was due the next day. I found him the right sources, stayed longer than my shift to help him outline. When he finally left, smiling, his shoulders seemed lighter. I carried that image home like a small treasure in my pocket. But at home, there was no treasure. I stood before the mirror, tugging at the black dress I'd chosen. Simple, plain, but respectful. My mother-in-law insisted on formal, or even at family dinners. Once, she had leaned across the table at Christmas, lips painted red, and whispered, "You've let yourself go, Emily. Daniel deserves a wife who keeps up appearances." I had smiled then, cheeks burning, my throat tight with unsaid words. That was my survival. Quiet endurance. But as I pinned my hair that evening, I caught my reflection. Tired eyes, a mouth too used to forced smiles. I pressed my hands to the sink, whispering to myself, "Just get through tonight." I didn't know then that tonight would split my life open. It wasn't always this way. When Daniel and I first met, he was magnetic. The kind of man who walked into a room and tilted the air toward himself. He had a way of listening that felt like sunlight, intense, almost blinding. Back then, I thought I had found someone who saw me, not just glanced at me. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming. I was standing by the bookshelf, studying the spines, when he came over and said, "You know more about these authors than the guy who bought them, don't you?" He was right. I laughed, and that laugh turned into a conversation that lasted 3 hours. He asked questions about my job at the library, about my favorite books, about what I dreamed of. Nobody had asked me those things in years. He had a way of leaning in, eyes steady, as if the rest of the party blurred away. That attention, it was intoxicating. In the early days, Daniel held my hand everywhere. At the movies, in crowded markets, even while driving. He'd text me in the middle of his busy day, "Thinking of you." I'd smile at the glowing screen, my heart swelling with the kind of hope you don't question. But slowly things shifted. It began with his mother. At Sunday dinners, she'd correct me. Small things at first. "Emily, dear, the fork goes on the left." Or, "You don't cook the roast this way, not in our family." Daniel would laugh, brushing it off. "That's just Mom, don't take it seriously." But I noticed the way he looked at her, seeking approval, soaking up her validation like a thirsty plant. When she raised her eyebrows at my dress choices, soon after he'd casually say, "Maybe try something sharper next time." My colleagues' wives always look so polished. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I didn't want to be sensitive. But one correction turned into another. My cooking was too bland. My voice was too soft. My job was sweet, but not ambitious. Then came the dismissals. Stay out of this, Emily. It's business talk. You wouldn't understand. Or worse, don't complicate things. Each time, a little piece of me folded smaller. The first real fracture happened at his company gala. I had dressed carefully, wearing a navy dress with a neckline just sharp enough to feel formal. Daniel introduced me around the room, glass of champagne in hand. "This is Emily," he said with a proud smile. My heart swelled, until he added, "She keeps me organized at home." The laughter that followed was harmless to everyone else, but I felt the heat climb up my neck. Organized at home? As if I were a calendar, a checklist. Not a partner. Not his wife. That night, I cried quietly in the bathroom, muffling the sound with a towel. Daniel knocked once, then left. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. After that, I began noticing the credit card bills. At first, I thought they were mistakes. Charges at luxury restaurants, hotel stays, high-end boutiques. "What's this?" I asked, pointing at one line item. "Client meeting," he said smoothly, not even looking up. "And this?" "Work dinner." Always business. Always work. I wanted to believe him. I clung to the memory of the man who had once listened so closely, who had once made me laugh by a stranger's bookshelf. I told myself I was being paranoid. But the doubt grew, slow and steady, like mold in a corner you pretend not to see. The worst part wasn't even the lies. It was the way he made me question myself. "Emily, you worry too much. You always imagine things. Stop overthinking." He said it with a smile, as if he were soothing me. But the message was clear. My instincts couldn't be trusted. I remember one night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling while he snored beside me. I whispered into the dark, "Am I losing myself?" The silence didn't answer, but the heaviness in my chest did. By the time his birthday came around, I had learned to swallow doubt the way some people swallow pills, with water, quickly, before it stuck in the throat. But the note under my plate? That was different. That was someone else whispering what I'd been too afraid to say. "You need to know." The words on that scrap of paper seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. "You need to know what your husband did here." I slipped it into my clutch, forcing my fingers still. Around me, the birthday dinner rolled on as if nothing had happened. Glasses clinked. My mother-in-law laughed too loudly at her own stories. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smug, soaking up the attention like a man who believed the whole room revolved around him. I felt like I was watching it all from underwater. "Emily, are you not eating?" my sister-in-law asked. Her lipstick was perfect, not a smudge despite the wine. "I'm fine," I said, nudging the food around my plate. My voice came out thinner than I wanted. Daniel glanced at me briefly, eyebrows raised. "You okay?" he asked, but his tone wasn't concern, it was irritation. An annoyance that I might disturb his evening. I forced a smile. "Just not hungry." The lie sat heavy in my mouth. After dessert, my mother-in-law stood for yet another toast. "To my son," she said, her voice swelling. "The man who keeps this family together, who honors us with his success and strength." She raised her glass. Everyone followed. I lifted mine, though my hand shook slightly. Inside, something twisted. Keeps this family together? He couldn't even keep the truth straight with me. The paper in my clutch felt like fire. I excused myself, slipping from the table with what I hoped was a polite smile. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I made my way toward the restroom. My hands trembled as I locked the stall door and pulled the note out again. The writing was rushed, almost panicked, as if the person hadn't had time to say more. But the word here pressed against me. What had Daniel done in this restaurant? I thought of the charges I'd seen months ago, lavish dinners, wine, bills that didn't match his story. My chest tightened. In the mirror, my reflection looked pale, my eyes wide and almost unrecognizable. I splashed water on my face, breathing slow, trying not to fall apart in a public bathroom. When I returned to the dining room, I searched for the waitress. My gaze swept across the crowded space. Couples laughing over candlelight, waiters weaving between tables. For a brief second, I spotted her. dark hair tied back, eyes flicking to mine before darting away. She disappeared behind the swinging kitchen door. The confirmation sent a shiver down my spine. She knew. I slid back into my seat, my pulse racing. Daniel was mid-conversation with his brother, animated, laughing. He didn't notice my return. For the rest of the evening, I barely spoke. My family-in-law chattered, praised, teased. The same perfect tableau they always performed. But inside me, something was unraveling, strand by strand. Later, as the party wound down, Daniel placed a hand on my lower back, steering me out like a prop. "Smile," he whispered, his teeth flashing at the doorman. I smiled. But in my clutch, the note burned against my palm. On the drive home, he hummed along to the radio content. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, silent. He didn't notice. He never noticed anymore. But I did. And for the first time in years, I wasn't swallowing the doubt. I was tasting it fully, bitter, sharp, undeniable. Something had happened in that restaurant, and I would find out what. That night, I couldn't sleep. Daniel fell into bed without a word, scrolling on his phone until his eyes drooped shut. Within minutes, he was snoring softly beside me, his face slack, peaceful, as if there were no secrets stitched into his life. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The note replayed in my mind like a drumbeat. "You need to know what your husband did here." The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and Daniel's steady breathing. My heart, though, thudded unevenly, every pulse sharp. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The floor was cold beneath me, grounding, almost cruel. I pulled out the folder I kept tucked away in the cabinet. The one with bills and statements I had been too afraid to examine fully. Tonight, I spread them across the table, paper after paper, line after line. There they were. Charges from this restaurant. Always high, 2 entrees, wine, dessert. Not a quick meal but an evening. I traced the dates with my finger. Some matched nights he had told me he was working late. Others aligned with family events he had skipped. The lines on the paper blurred as my eyes stung. For so long, I had let myself believe I was imagining things. That maybe I was paranoid. That maybe I was the problem. He had told me so often. "You always overthink, Emily." But this wasn't imagination. This was proof. I leaned back in the chair, the quiet pressing down on me. My mind spun with memories, little red flags I had buried. The faint smell of unfamiliar perfume on his jacket once. The way he'd suddenly end calls when I entered the room. The weekend he claimed to be in Chicago, but the credit card showed a bill from a hotel 20 minutes from here. I pressed my palms into my eyes, fighting the ache in my chest. All those nights I had questioned myself. All those moments I had stayed silent to keep the peace. I had been shrinking for years, folding myself smaller and smaller to fit the space he allowed me. But now someone else had seen. Someone else thought I deserved to know. The difference between suspicion and truth was like the difference between shadow and flame. And now the flame was catching. I stood, pacing the kitchen, arms crossed tight. My reflection caught in the dark window, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. Was this who I had become? A ghost in my own marriage. A woman who smiled on command, who swallowed humiliation like water. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. For the first time in years, I felt something spark beneath the grief. Anger, not wild, not destructive, but quiet, steady, like a pilot light that had never gone out, only hidden. I whispered into the kitchen air, testing the words on my tongue. "I'm going to find out." My voice trembled at first, then steadied. I deserved the truth. It wasn't a plan yet. It wasn't even revenge. But it was a decision. I returned to bed, sliding under the covers without waking him. Daniel shifted, mumbling something incoherent, before rolling away. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep a single minute. But I no longer felt powerless. The note had torn open the silence I'd been living in. And now there was no going back. The next morning, Daniel left early for work. He kissed my cheek absently, his phone pressed between his ear and shoulder, already speaking about numbers, deadlines, deals. The door shut behind him, and the house fell into silence. I sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee, staring at the note. "You need to know what your husband did here." The words had carved themselves into me. The only question was, how? I couldn't ask Daniel outright. He was too good at slipping out of corners, too skilled at twisting my doubts into foolishness. If I accused him without proof, he'd sigh, roll his eyes, and pat my hand. Emily, not this again. Don't be dramatic. No, I needed more. So I began with the restaurant. The following week, on my day off, I walked there. Not as Daniel's wife, not dressed for a family dinner, just me, in jeans and a plain sweater. The place looked different in daylight. The chandeliers unlit, the chairs stacked neatly, the air faintly scented with lemon polish and lingering garlic. A waitress was wiping tables. Not the same one as before. I hesitated, then forced a smile. Hi, I was here last week for a party. I think I dropped something. She looked up. Do you know which section you were in? I gave a vague description. She shook her head kindly. We clean thoroughly every night. If it was valuable, you'd have to ask the manager. My heart sank. I thanked her, turned to leave, then caught sight of her colleague emerging from the back. The waitress from the birthday dinner. Her eyes flicked to mine, recognition flashing quickly before she masked it. My breath caught. I almost approached her, but the manager appeared, and she vanished into the kitchen. Setback 1. At home, I dug deeper. I combed through Daniel's statements, matching dates and times. Again and again, the restaurant appeared. Always expensive meals for two. I cross-checked the dates with my own calendar. One landed like a blow. It was the night of my birthday 2 years ago. Daniel had canceled our dinner, claiming he was swamped at the office. I remembered sitting alone at our table, candles lit, his untouched plate across from me. I had eaten in silence, telling myself he couldn't help it. But the receipt showed otherwise. That night he had been here, with someone. My stomach clenched. I tried again to approach the waitress. Twice, I returned, ordering coffee, lingering longer than reasonable. Each time, she avoided me. She carried herself with caution as if watched. On the third visit, she finally approached my table, setting down a napkin with trembling hands. Beneath it, a whisper. Not safe here. I looked up sharply, but she was already gone. The napkin was blank, but the message was clear. She knew something. She wanted to help, but she was afraid. Setback 2. That night, I barely touched dinner. Daniel noticed. You've been distant lately. Is something wrong? My fork hovered midair. I wanted to scream yes, everything is wrong, but I swallowed the words. Just tired, I murmured. He studied me, suspicion narrowing his eyes. For a moment, I thought he'd press further. Instead, he shrugged and returned to his phone. Relief and bitterness tangled in me. Days blurred into weeks. My life became a careful balancing act. The calm librarian by day, the quiet detective by night. I copied statements, highlighted dates, circled amounts. A pattern emerged. Dinners every few weeks, always around the same time. Once I followed him. He left the house dressed sharply, claiming to meet a client. I drove a few cars behind, heart hammering. He pulled into the restaurant. I parked on the next block, hands trembling around the steering wheel. Through the window, I saw him sit at a corner booth. Moments later, a woman joined him. Young, polished, with hair that gleamed under the chandelier. She leaned forward, laughing at something he said. His smile, wide, easy, the one he rarely gave me anymore, stretched across his face. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles burned. I couldn't hear them, couldn't march in without proof, but I didn't need to. The truth glared through the glass. I drove away, tears blurring the road. Shame and rage colliding inside me. Setback 3, but also confirmation. That night, he came home late, humming, whistling. He smelled faintly of cologne and wine. I lay awake, staring at him, my chest tight. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was calculating. If I exposed him recklessly, he'd twist it back on me. He'd call me hysterical, bitter, ungrateful. His mother would rally around him, praising his strength in enduring a difficult wife. No. I needed a truth so undeniable that not even Daniel could wriggle free. The following week, I returned to the restaurant once more. I waited until the crowd thinned, then quietly approached the dark-haired waitress near the kitchen door. I'm not here to cause trouble. I whispered. My voice shook, but I forced it steady. I just need the truth. She froze, eyes darting to the manager, then back to me. Her lips parted as if to speak, but then she shook her head, slipping into the kitchen. I felt the sting of failure again, but something in her gaze lingered. Not refusal, fear. I left the restaurant with nothing but questions. Setback 4. Back home, I stared at my notes, receipts, memories. I was exhausted. Every attempt at clarity had ended in silence or half-answers. But the ember in me refused to die. Daniel had humiliated me quietly for years, shrinking me down until I barely recognized myself. But now, for the first time, I wasn't shrinking. I was gathering, piece by piece. And one day, I would have enough. It was his mother's birthday. A grand dinner, the kind she insisted on every year, where Daniel played the devoted son and I the dutiful wife. This year, though, the guest list had widened. Some of his colleagues were invited too, business partners she wanted to impress. The restaurant? Of course, the same one. The chandeliers blazed, the tables sparkled with glassware, and laughter rippled through the air. Daniel thrived in this setting. He shook hands, clapped shoulders, told charming stories. His mother glowed beside him, basking in the reflection of her successful son. I sat quietly, my pulse steady. Tonight, the truth would no longer hide in receipts and shadows. Dinner began. Toasts were made. His mother rose, lifting her glass. To my son, she declared, a man of integrity, discipline, and devotion. He has always made me proud. Glasses clinked. Daniel smiled that perfect smile. I stood. My chair scraped softly against the floor. But the sound sliced through the laughter. Every head turned. Integrity, I said softly. My voice trembled at first, then steadied. That's a beautiful word. But sometimes it's just a costume. Daniel's smile faltered. Emily, sit down. I held his gaze. No. I've sat down long enough. I reached into my bag and unfolded a small stack of papers, copies of the receipts, neatly highlighted. I laid them on the table in front of him. The dates, the amounts, the restaurant's name staring back like open wounds. His mother frowned. What is this? Proof, I said. For years, while I ate alone, Daniel was here. With her. I glanced at the corner of the room, where on cue, the dark-haired waitress hovered, pale but resolute. I had begged her once more, and this time she had agreed. The waitress stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. He came often. Always with the same woman. Not his wife. The silence was crushing. Forks stilled, glasses lowered. His colleagues stared, wide-eyed, at the man they thought they knew. Daniel pushed back his chair, face darkening. This is ridiculous. Don't. I cut in, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Don't you dare call me dramatic or mistaken. Not tonight. I pulled one last envelope from my bag. With slow, deliberate hands, I opened it and spread photographs across the table. Taken through the restaurant's windows, blurred slightly by glass but clear enough. Daniel, smiling, leaning close to the woman, their hands touching across the table. Gasps rose around us. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's mask cracked. His voice faltered. Emily, please. I looked at him, really looked, at the man who had once promised me honesty, who had slowly starved me of it, year after year. You taught me to doubt myself, I whispered. To believe my questions were flaws. But the truth doesn't bend to your charm. It doesn't disappear when you call it silly. It waits. And tonight it's here. He reached for me, but I stepped back. The space between us felt like a chasm. Around the table, no one moved to defend him. Not even his mother. Her face was gray, her proud words turned to ash. His colleagues muttered quietly, exchanging glances. Reputation, respect, trust, they were slipping from him in real time, right in front of their eyes. For the first time, Daniel looked small. I gathered my bag, leaving the papers and photographs spread before him like evidence in a trial. Happy birthday, I said softly to his mother. At least now, you have the truth about your son. And then I walked out. The night air hit me like a wave, cold, clean, and real. My hands trembled, my heart raced, but I felt taller than I had in years. I didn't have all the answers about tomorrow. But tonight, I had reclaimed my voice. and Daniel could never take it back. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Daniel tried calling, texting, even showing up at my door once, but I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The silence I carried now was no longer heavy. It was mine. People talk about freedom as if it comes all at once, like a key turning in a lock. But for me, it arrived in pieces. In the mornings, when I made coffee without checking the clock for his return. In the evenings, when I read a book without wondering where he was. In the mirror, when I looked at my own face and recognized strength where doubt had lived for years. The truth had shattered the life I thought I had. But it also gave me back something I'd forgotten, myself. One afternoon, I walked past the restaurant. The same glass doors, the same glowing chandeliers inside. But it no longer haunted me. It was just a place. Nothing more. I smiled and kept walking. Because the real story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about the woman who stopped doubting her own eyes, who refused to sit quietly at the table of lies, who finally chose her own voice. And that woman was me.